Greetings, fellow educators far and near. Thank you and welcome again to another episode of FECG TV, which stands for the Fisher Educational Consulting Group television channel. Our channel is a YouTube channel that focuses on specific current and relevant issues and topics in education. And we also feature specific practitioners who are really adept at our current topic. My name is Sean Fisher. I'm the proud CEO and owner of the Fisher Educational Consulting Group. And today we have an awesome guest, Mrs. Kara Schultz. Mrs. Schultz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Sean. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So everyone that tunes into our channel, you know the format. We try to keep it simple because we know that as educators, we have a lot of things to do and we need to get our information quick, fast, down and dirty, so to speak. So our format will be, we'll ask 8 to 10 questions of our guest, and she'll answer those questions. If we need more time, we'll go through more in depth. So let's go ahead and start with our first question, Kara. I'm just looking at my notes here. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you professionally and personally, if you would like.
Sure. My name is Kara Schultz, and I have a master's degree in education from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I currently live in Colorado, where I'm a high school English language development teacher. I have always worked with our English language learning population. I started teaching first grade, moved up to fifth grade, moved to middle school, following that ELL focus. When I moved to the high school level, I taught as the content teacher, the English teacher that was responsible for the English content, but always with a co-teacher that was an ELD teacher. So recently, I moved into the other side, into the ELD teacher role. So I still get to co-teach, which is probably my most favorite thing to do. But I also get to do a lot of extra PD and working with teachers to help them serve and support our ELL population.
Wow, thank you. So you've had a diversified experience. Yeah. Wow, so you started out in elementary and now you're in high school. So you have the whole K-12 experience. And now you're on the other side, you are the co-teacher.
Yeah.
Yep, so cool. Okay, so this wasn't one of the questions, but you know what? This is a moment for me to just kind of shift. So for teachers in the classroom who are considering becoming an ELD specialist or an ELD teacher, one, how do they do it? But also, what has been the difference? What has been the benefit for you being on the other side?
Great question, actually. So your ELD certification is going to differ depending on your state that your teaching certificate was issued in. In Michigan, it's a certificate that you add on to a teaching degree. So it was an additional 30 hours of work and an additional practicum on top of student teaching. In Colorado, very similar. I believe that this year they're going to take away that practicum piece and make it more of an observational. If you remember those very early hours that you did observing in a classroom, I believe that they're going to take that back down a bit. In Colorado, currently, they are requiring all core content teachers at all levels. So every elementary school teacher, and then every teacher at the secondary, middle, and high school levels that teaches like math or science or social studies or English to attain a 45-hour certificate for teaching English language learners. So I think that certificate is maybe going to come down the pipeline.
Oh, wow. Very similar to maybe about 10 years ago when most states required teachers to go back and get the reading content course.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yep. And correct me if I'm wrong, but just from my limited experience, with ELL curriculum, this certificate really should help you in instructing all students, correct?
Yeah, and I would say I would be remiss if I didn't tell you my favorite thing, which is the fact that a lot of the strategies that I learned through my ELL certificate or certification program and in my work continuously professionally developing in teaching strategies for ELLs, is that those strategies are useful for every single student in the classroom, from your really high achieving students to further challenge them to some of your students even on an IEP that needs a different kind of support. It just sort of broadens your lens of how I can help students. And I don't love the toolbox idea, but it is like putting just more tools in my toolbox as a teacher for my practice.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite thing about being an ELD teacher, moving from a content area where I taught English all day, or before that I taught social studies all day, I saw students only as English students, right? Readers and writers, or I saw students only as historians in social studies. And some students don't love English. They don't love reading and writing. They don't love the tasks of learning about history. As an ELD teacher, I get to co-teach in science class, math class. I teach my own sheltered English class. So I get to see students, sometimes the same students, multiple times a day, and see where they have these proficiencies or these aptitudes, regardless of their linguistic ability in English.
Wow. Thank you. So
Very
you have that whole equity piece down there. Perfect. Right. And so that takes us actually to our second question. Perfect segue. Thank you. You are a great interview. What equity issues do you see most in your classrooms with regards to English language learners?
So I would narrow it down to three different sort of avenues, I guess, for equity or inequity that we're fighting. The first is teacher perspective. And it sounds like it's something that we can control, but it's really hard. Imagine you have a student that comes into your classroom and it's halfway through the semester. This is a new student to the school. They came from maybe a war-torn nation, a refugee camp, something like that. They come into your class and they don't speak any English. Teacher perspective is usually pretty legit. They know this student doesn't have a ton of English in their wheelhouse. So I need to really scaffold that English. Some teachers are going to use like Google Translate, or they're going to try to do everything in pictures, whatever they need to do. Their perspective is going to match the skill level of those students in English, likely. But that system breaks down when you have students that come from a country, maybe dad came a couple of years ago, now mom and student are coming in, and they've actually been doing a lot of like watching English television, maybe taking English class in preparation for moving to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Those students have a high developed social language level, right? Because when you take a class, like I'm going to learn Spanish, they're going to teach me how to say good morning and go shopping and go order food, maybe. That's the same thing that's going to happen to this student that's coming in who has, worked for a couple of years maybe on developing their social English skills. The trick is when that student comes into the teacher's classroom and they give them that syllabus and they say, hey, read this tonight. If you have any questions, have your parent write them down or send me an email. Oh, and by the way, there's the turn-in bin over there. And oh, by the way, I don't accept late homework and I'm going to mark you down for that. They give all of this academic, not necessarily social words, like syllabus is a very weird word. The idea of late work or a turn-in bin, weird, right? We don't use these when we're shopping or ordering food at a restaurant. So even though the student might come in and have the social words to say, good morning, Mr. Fisher, my name is Kara, I'm so glad to be in your class. As the student, I've given the teacher a different perspective than what my skills are actually at academically. The teacher then gives me all this information back, and then the teacher gets frustrated and the student gets frustrated when the student doesn't bring the syllabus back because they didn't quite catch that, or they don't turn in homework because they didn't understand the turn in bin language. So then the inequity starts to surface because the teacher is doing their best based on what they're observing, but the student is only showing this social proficiency, and this academic proficiency is below the surface. So that teacher perspective is huge in inequity, and it's hard, I think, to give teachers a huge amount of tools in order to fix that or to address it. One thing teachers can do is ask a lot of open-ended questions. Give the syllabus, tell them it's due tomorrow, and ask them, oh, when are you going to give me that paper back? Right? And then if they look at you kind of confused, you have to go through it again. If they tell you, right, oh, tomorrow, miss, teacher, perfect, great. Then you know that you've gotten through and that they understand the words that you're saying. So many of our language learners say, yes, they understand, and no, they don't have any questions. because as we know, that's the path of least resistance and least pressure on them. So teacher perspective would be the first one. I'd say the second is student access, and that's just access to curriculum. We want students who are coming from another country with a different home language than English to access the same information as far as the depth and the complexity of the concepts. Very, very easy to dilute information to give to students. It's very easy to give them, it's hot outside versus this is the hottest day of the year on record, right? We don't want to dilute it. If we're teaching photosynthesis, we want to talk about photosynthesis. We don't want to talk about plants making energy, right? We don't want to change the words because they're lower level words. We want to teach that word photosynthesis just like we do to our English speaking students. Even though it might be a bit challenging, we might have to do it in a different way. So teacher perspectives, student access, and then the last one is student emotional support. I think that there is, in my school and in my experience, a big discrepancy in social emotional support in lots of student groups, but in students that don't speak English, they don't have the counselors necessarily to go to talk about that. There's a book, it's a great book called Newcomers by Helen Thorpe, and it really brings you into the mindset of a group of English language learners that actually attended South Middle School outside of Denver. And they had a social worker that came in that was trained to work with students whose second or third language was English. And so she used different strategies to achieve that same emotional support. Now, we've all this past year gone through the trauma of COVID, but we have English language learners that have been coming to school from a refugee camp, from being torn away from their families, maybe international adoptions. They have a whole level of emotional support needs that we, and at least my experience, have not really been equipped to handle. So that's the third one. And I think maybe that's the one I'd like to do the most more learning about because I think it's hard.
Thank you. Those are great perspectives. So let me just make sure I have those. Student access was number 2. Social emotional student support was 3. And the first one was access. Is that correct?
The first one was teacher perspective. Like, how does the teacher know what level the English learner is speaking at, or understanding at?
Yeah, thank you. I have it in my notes here. Teacher perspective, social language level. So we're going to look that up a little bit more. That's one I want to dig into a little bit later. I'll ask you maybe to suggest some resources so teachers can understand really the difference between social language and, I believe we're talking about, versus academic language.
Yep.
Perfect. So I wanted to push you a little bit and maybe just dig a little bit deeper. Along the concept of teacher perspective, maybe this question I think it may live in there somewhere. Are there grading practices that maybe teachers of English language learners should be looking at to one, let their maybe newcomer status or their English language learner status not be a barrier to properly assessing what they know? And just also being fair.
Sorry. I would say the biggest strategy that I found the most success in, the most versatile strategy, I would say, is asking open-ended questions. So for example, in my biology class, I have some students who are a LEP, a limited English proficiency student. On a multiple choice test, if the vocabulary that's used in the question is not the same vocabulary that we're using when we teach, that vocabulary is going to trick that student up unnecessarily. It's not related to the core concepts of biology that we're assessing. So if I have the student work with me and take that multiple choice test, I can look at the ones that the student gets wrong. Usually they're kind of clustered, right? Around maybe there is a cartogram, right? And the student says, well, I'm struggling with, I understand the word cartogram because that was our like skill that we taught or the vocab we taught to everybody as academic language. But what they're confused about is when we use the words offspring or baby or sibling or cousin, and we're using these in the questions about the cartogram. When you do that, when you're looking like at a family tree and you talk about offspring versus babies, most native English speakers can interchange those. But for somebody who's learning English, maybe they're not connecting that. Maybe they've learned offspring in the vacuum of biology. So what I can do is say, look at this family tree. Can you tell me who is related to who? Where does the genetic mutation, again, vocabulary that we focused on in the unit, where does the genetic mutation go through the family tree? So I can ask the student some very not leading, right? I want to be very careful to not be leading and not to give yes, no, right, wrong answers or questions. But if I can ask them to describe, then they can use their level of English to describe to me what they see. And then I can assess their knowledge of the concept of the family tree or the pedigree. Then instead of like testing whether or not they can interchange cousin, sibling, offspring, baby. Does that help?
Actually, yes, it does. That was, yeah, definitely. I asked about grading practices, and what you did was even better. You actually gave us instructional strategies that would influence. So actually, the grades that we would see if we're implementing those instructional strategies you talked about,
yeah,
I think those grades will be more accurate and more truer as a reflection of the student's understanding.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. Like,
so if you're
backwards design, so I like that.
Sorry, if you want to look at rubrics, a lot of the more holistic rubrics, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of them using 4 examples of figurative language, they're using figurative language intentionally and purposefully. Mm. So then you're not grading the number. It's not a checklist kind of rubric. It's a quality. Are they demonstrating that they understand the words or the idea of figurative language?
Perfect. Thank you. So,
yeah.
Tell me again, what was the name of that type of rubric?
A holistic.
Holistic. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, next question. What 1 or 2 strategies have the greatest, in your experience, what 1 or 2 strategies have the greatest yield in creating equity for English language learners? You kind of touched on it prior.
Yeah, so really, I mean, I can't say it enough, open-ended questions. Mm-hmm. Also, I think discussion is how we learn language. Mm-hmm. So going back to like the cartogram, so a cartogram is like a map, right, that you're using to track. So if I gave students different populations and asked them to place those onto some kind of a map or some kind of a visual, and then if they had to then agree with another student, possibly a native English speaking student, on some general questions, hopefully questions that are not regurgitating something that we talked about in class, but maybe something like, which country had the greatest influence over the tea trade? And then if they have to work together to come up with that vocabulary and that answer, that's really powerful. This is challenging because your pairings have to be very intentional. I have used that. If you want to be really brave, I've used also the pairings with students that have the same native language that's not English. Mm-hmm. And then just sort of watch their body language, right? High schoolers are going to try to get away with stuff if they can. But you can look at English speakers, you can look at Spanish speakers, you can look at Chinese speakers. And as a teacher, I think you know, are they on task or are they goofing around, right? But having them, giving them that opportunity to talk to somebody else in Chinese if they speak Chinese, and then come up together with the English response. High cognitive load. They still have to do that agreement step, which is hard. And then for them to then put it together in English to share out or to turn in, is another level that's tailored just to them.
Wow, no, that was super helpful. Thank you. You're talking about some of the higher order thinking as well. So probably at level 3, level 4, if we're looking at DOK.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question, how have you been able to identify giftedness in English language learners?
So I'm really lucky in that I co-teach in a math class and in a science class. And so many of our students come from other countries as high schoolers. They have taken some math courses, maybe in Russian, and they come and they're able to then map that Russian concept or the concept in math that they learned in Russian into the concept that we're learning in English. And you sort of see these students who make these higher level connections. And I think in math specifically, but also science, because there's so many diagrams in science, there's so many like charts and graphs and things that you can like observe their thinking. So usually that's where that giftedness surfaces, or at least something that might indicate a giftedness surfaces. Of course, you have the students on occasion who come to the United States and don't speak any English, and they learn English so incredibly quickly and are asking you about very specific conjugations or which is the best of these synonyms to use. And they almost have like a linguistic gift. And so those students really do stand out quickly. But I think a lot of times giftedness is not necessarily in one content area. It's about that really high order thinking and being able to connect ideas that maybe I'm not even connecting, right? And they're like, oh, is this like this other class? And I'm like, wow, yes, it is.
All right. So not boxing in their giftedness, looking at it in different areas.
Right. And not relying on their language to show you that.
Thank you. So nonverbal assessments.
Yep. Nonverbal, any kind of diagrams that they might draw, just questions that they ask sometimes, you're like, oh, I see where you're going with this.
So I'm looking at my notes, and one thing I lifted up was, it sounded like you said, try to create multiple ways for them to make their thinking visible.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And that's a great, when you're talking about assessments too. What you want to be careful of, I think at least what I want to be careful of is I am assessing them on their mastery of the skill we're focused on, not on their mastery of English. And just really being cognizant of that and asking myself, did they get this wrong because of their English level, or did they get this wrong because they were all the way over in left field answering something different?
Okay. So make sure that we keep the main thing the main thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The main thing, the main thing. I like it.
All right. There we go. Thank you. Okay. Next question, just kind of building on the giftedness piece. I feel like in Colorado, you all are familiar with 2E as well, twice exceptional.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, perfect. So just thinking around those terms, what's your approach for properly supporting English language learners with IEPs or individual educational plans?
So really number one is that in order to certify a student that's an English language learner as having any kind of disability, we would test them and assess them in both their home language and in English. And then the other key the other commitment that we make is we collect a ton of data. Some students come to us with lots of different levels of literacy in their background. And so maybe a written test, maybe phonics is not the way to assess if there is a learning like obstacle or a learning challenge for them.
I wonder if I could inject really quickly. Just thinking about what you said, collecting tons of data, is that part of your MTSS process by chance, or?
MTSS, like RTI?
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So before we even get to RTI, we collect a lot of data on our English language learners because we need to know what they need to know to be successful, right? We need to know, was their schooling interrupted? At what level was their schooling interrupted? How long have they been out of school? I think my video just glitched. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you came back. You're here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we take from day one a lot of data, just as there are English language students. If we notice something, we notice that they're struggling with positive and negative numbers, for example, and they're 15 or 16 years old, that might be a flag for us to collect more and specific data in like concert with the math teacher, maybe involve the RTI team to look at that, right? Something like, if I gave you money and you gave me money back, and that was a challenge for maybe a student, that might be something that we would investigate. But we really try to get to know the backgrounds of our students academically and personally, so that we're not jumping to any conclusions. And then we have students that are ELLs and have IEPs. And then that becomes a team effort between the ELD teacher and the case manager for the IEP.
So that might be a separate interview in itself. I would love to pick your brain later about how those two staff partner to support a student.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're kind of similar in their goals, but still a little bit different.
Yep.
I'd love to see how you partner.
Yeah, so, I'd love to do that.
Yep. So I'm going to keep you on a retainer for our second interview.
Fair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So what pitfalls should socials, can't read my own writing here. Give me one moment. So I'm thinking specifically where in my practice, I've observed barriers to equity, specifically around social studies and language arts. So my question would be to you, what pitfalls should social studies teachers and language arts teachers strive to avoid when teaching English language learners?
Okay, so one we already talked about, and I think you see it more in the English language arts classes, where the whole class is reading Of Mice and Men, and there's a student that's limited English proficiency, and the teacher might either just give them the audiobook and say, just listen to it, or they might give them like an abridged version, like a lower level version. The lower level version is going to give them the story, right? But oftentimes, and as a former English teacher, I would argue that the story isn't necessarily the grit of what I'm teaching. It's not the guts, I guess. The guts is this discussion about the characters and how the characters interact and how they are portrayed. That can get lost in an abridged version. If you do just the audio, it's not because a student can't read that they can't access Of Mice and Men, the grade level version. It's because they don't have the English vocabulary built up. So if you give them the audiobook, they're hearing the words, but they still don't have that vocabulary built up yet, right? They're still working on that. What I might recommend, if you can find it, and it does exist for a lot of classics, is to have the students reading the on grade level book, and at the same time pairing it with a graphic novel representation. Oftentimes we see like good graphic novels, they like artistically represent the characters in a similar feeling as to how the characters were portrayed in the grade level text. If you are so lucky as to have a co-teacher in your classroom, though, it's also helpful for that co-teacher to take a minute and just recap the overarching story, so that then the students during class can read along with the class and focus in. When the teacher leads them through analyzing how this character is described, they can do that with the class, right? Because they understand the character because the co-teacher has maybe given them that preview already. So really trying to not dilute and really try to build access. Another way you can do this is by giving different texts to different students that have the same theme, if your focus is then on talking about theme, right? Maybe it's not, you can't talk about word choice then because different people are reading different books, or different articles maybe. But you could talk about equity or, perseverance if you give different levels of reading to different students in the classroom. And of course, we wouldn't want to give only the English language learners one article and everyone else the other article. We want to kind of divide it up.
I like that. Thank you.
So that's English. You want me to do social studies?
Yes, but I want to say this part first. Just to highlight, I like the fact that you're approaching it from, it looks like to me, the educational justice perspective. You're making sure that those students they're getting what they deserve as far as grade level exposure. Like, and you're not watering things down for them. Like, you're treating them like a deserving citizen of that classroom who's deserving of everything that everyone else is getting. So I like that approach. Yeah, let me not stop you. Please tell me about social studies too. Thank you.
So going back to when we talked about vocabulary and social language and academic language, I challenge you to think about the vocabulary and the words that you use when you teach social studies. And I would hypothesize that you have what are sometimes called the BRIC words, which are Cuban Missile Crisis, or President Eisenhower, something like that, right? Those are your BRIC words that you're teaching to all the students as new vocabulary, and you're teaching students to connect those words together. You're going to do that for your English language learners as well. The next thing that a social studies teacher often uses or teaches are mortar words, and mortar in a building goes between the bricks. So the words that they're using to connect, Dr. King rose up against, right? So these words, rose up against, are very complex English words that maybe as a social studies teacher, I would just say, and I would assume, which is not probably a great thing to do, that my students would all understand what I mean, rose up, right? Sometimes I think it's worth taking a minute to really talk about what does that mean? What does rise up against something mean? A strategy that you could use for this is called probable passages. It's great. It's by Kylene Beers. She would recommend that you put 8 to 14 words or phrases up on the board, like sort of spread out, and have students connect those words. So with English language learners, I might put Dr. King and write it in red, and maybe JFK and put it in red, and racial injustice and put it in red. Those are my BRIC words, right? Then I might use a different color like blue and put some of these words that I want students to use to connect those ideas together, like alliance, or even, ally, thinking that I want them to hopefully pick Dr. King and JFK as allies against racial injustice. If I can do that, then I can quickly look at my students' papers. I usually have them do it on like a note card, and then I just go through the note cards really quick, and then if I see a pattern of confusion, I address it. But it also tells me if none of my students are using the words ally or allies in their connection, in their probable passage, then I need to go back and teach that mortar word. I need to go back and teach them how this word can be used to connect these other ideas. So BRIC words, mortar words, and are we teaching both of them?
Okay, we might have our third follow-up interview. That's a big concept. It's super important. I like that. It kind of drills down to the specific instructional delivery strategies. So I love that, because I think no matter what the topic is or subject area, it always comes down to reading. That's the way that we consume all materials, right?
Yep.
No matter what the subject area is, every subject area has a specific vocabulary, right? Like art may talk about warmth of color, palettes, schemes.
Yeah.
PE may talk about, a three-point shot, dribbling, something like that. So everyone has a specific academic vocabulary, which involves reading. So those brick and mortar words, that concept is transcendent. Yep.
It's also, when I talk to other teachers, I'm like, think about it in your content area. If you ask students to demonstrate their understanding, like in math, a lot of times it's like writing the formula out and showing the steps. Well, in English, it's going to be like maybe writing a paragraph. But every teacher is going to say those same words: demonstrate to me, blah, 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 or explain, blah, blah, blah. What are you expecting to see from students? And maybe showing them that every once in a while, just as a reminder, might help, might scaffold everybody. Yeah.
And thinking of math, a math problem is a form of a sentence. Like
right.
3 + 3 = 6 is almost the same as the dog and cat walked across the street. It's a sentence. Yeah. So, and there's brick and mortar words, so to speak, in those math problems.
For sure.
Yep.
Math is very complex, I think. I think maybe the most complex.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. Okay, let me think here. I'm going to shift just a little bit. I want to kind of capitalize and play on all of your experience from the K through 12 level, and also you've always been a teacher leader. I know that just from reading your bio, but more so now, like you're leading a lot of the collaboration. So I want to kind of pick your mind as far as advice that you might give an administrator. So let me pose the question to you. Regarding scheduling or curricula decision, what advice would you give administrators around perhaps scheduling co-taught classes versus sheltered classes?
That's a really hard question. I think you have to know your student population.
Mhm.
I know for my particular high school, we get the majority of new students to our building each year are LEPs, so limited English proficient. So we had to create and plan scheduling wise, budgetary wise, how to provide for them, right? Because that's our biggest group. But knowing that, we needed to also make sure that we have a system in place for our NEPs, because every year we get at least a handful of not English proficient students with all sorts of a variety of backgrounds. So how can we meet their needs, and how can we do that on the fly? So a couple of really pragmatic things are, I have common plan time with both of my co-teachers as well as with the other ELD teacher in the building. That's paramount. You know, as an educator, time is our greatest resource. And even though I might not sit down with my co-teacher every day for that 50-minute block, I am using that 50-minute block to plan discreetly or intentionally for that class, right? Whether it's helping to scaffold with some extra supports, whether it is brainstorming, what are the brick and mortar words in this lesson coming up and how do we attend to all of them? And then coming back to my co-teacher and brainstorming strategies that she and I or he and I can use. So time and that shared time, I think, is so, so critical. I also think we actually sat down and made a flow chart and said, we use WIDA and Access to monitor. It's one of our data points. So when we get a new student, we give them the WIDA screener. If a student comes in at a WIDA 3, what should their pathway be like for the next 4 years? Or maybe they come in as a junior. Where do they go as a senior, right? Really thinking about all those kinds of inevitabilities. If they come in as a 1, a NEP, where do they go for the next 4 years? Are we ensuring that they have electives and the availability for electives? Are we scheduling them in a way that they can get the most out of the co-taught offerings that we have? Because, of course, we're limited. I can only co-teach 1 science and 1 math. At the end of each year, we do run another data set that tells us where the demand is for the following year. So this year I taught biology because that was where I co-taught biology because that's where our demand was. Last year or the year before, I taught earth science because that's where the demand was.
A lot of this is driven.
Sorry?
I'm sorry. And a lot of these decisions are driven by the WIDA data.
Yep, a lot of it's by the WIDA. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know maybe it's like 5 or 6 years ago it switched.
Yeah.
6 is now the highest, right?
Yeah, 6 is the highest.
Okay. I remember like maybe 10 years ago it was kind of reversed.
Yeah, and it's really, I always show teachers, especially like my co-teachers and people that are, sometimes teachers get frustrated, sometimes students get frustrated with like the growth because English language learners often have these explosions. But if a teacher is so lucky to have that explosion in the first part of the year, they sometimes get frustrated or they get a little bit down on themselves because they're not seeing that explosion with the student for the rest of the year. But if you look at the WIDA guidance, it takes you about a year, right, to go from 0 to 1. And then it takes like 2 years for you to be a 2. And then 3 years for you to be a 3. So in high school, if you come in as a 1, you're not going to get to be a 6 by the time you leave high school, even though we would love for that to somehow magically happen. But no, we have to have realistic expectations of where students are and the amount of growth they can give. And then we have to create those pathways that are respectful of that expected growth.
And help me to remember, what level does a student exit the program?
That can be up to your school district, but we use the rule of thumb at about 4 to 4.5 in reading and writing. Of course, there's always expectations, which I guess would be the last thing that I would share as far as advice. You know, we have these awesome systems in place. We have this expected path. We have expected growth that the student will move to a 2 next year, but the student might not. So what do we do? What is the plan for that student? Because what you don't want to do in August, we start school at the beginning of August, what we don't want to do is scramble. And what we don't want to do is take away drawing and painting from a student that excels at that because we don't know what else to do. We want to be able to say, this is the most respectful and the most responsible way to use that time in class or in school for that student.
It sounds like you're emphasizing, because I know very often in education, there's a strategy of, or I guess not strategy, common practice of replacing electives with intervention courses.
Yeah.
And that's not the best, especially when we're thinking about social emotional support of students or just their social emotional health, you know.
And we try very hard. We do have, we offer 2 ESL sheltered instruction classes in addition to like the newcomer class. But we do have a conversation with the student and the parent, and we let them know, this is an elective. We really think it would benefit you, but we want you to see that benefit and you to buy into it. Okay. And then we do offer, you know, that changes at the semester. So they can choose to stay in it if they think, hey, I've made a lot of growth. This has been great for me. Great. Maybe they need a break. Okay, great. Take the break and, you know, take something else instead.
Thank you. One more administrator question. Around the nation, different administrators that I work with, they engage in something called site-based management, where each school kind of manages itself and a administrator is given a certain budget. So a lot of them are looking at frameworks or instructional frameworks or curriculum to purchase to kind of support their English language learners. About 80% of them have mentioned either, 80% of the ones that I've contacted have mentioned either GLAD or psyop. Where do you land on the 2? Could you tell me a little bit about your thought process around it?
So I guess in the interest of money, maybe send one person. I like aspects of both. I think psyop is very focused on the sheltered instruction, right? What can we do in the classroom? And then I think the thing that GLAD adds to it is that, is that it adds that respect and that relationship piece. And I don't think you can do one without the other, if that makes sense to you. I think that front loading, previewing, building background knowledge is more psyop. I think that's really beneficial for teachers who are maybe social studies teachers or English teachers or math teachers. You know, it's comfortable, but also I would beware because not all cultures want to be front loaded, right? Some cultures do want it to be on an as needed basis. The GLAD program talks a lot about, I think what I've touched on, like the focus is on access, not dilution, right? This is build that respect. How do we really demonstrate a value of their home language in our classrooms? So I know this is not like the cheap answer, but I like them both.
No, that's fine. I wasn't looking for an endorsement. I was looking for just what you gave us.
It's like pieces, right? It's like any good, you know, you do the first 40 days, right? And you like some of those things. And then you read Teach Like a Champion and you do some of those things. And then by the end of it, you have like a great program.
No, you're right on it. We'll leave the endorsement to both of those companies. You gave us just what we needed, like from a practitioner's perspective, what's worked and what hasn't worked. So I think as an administrator, as teacher leaders, we're going to be concerned with what works and what moves students along. And the things that you mentioned, like relationship building, that's going to be key as we come out of this COVID, if ever we fully come out of it, in the next 2 years. Yeah, but then also, like you said, English, math, and social studies are very technical. So having those pathways or existing structures for teaching language or front loading, that's important. But kind of, what you said, not being married to it, like do it as needed.
Yeah.
I understand the cultural piece. See, that's something that we would not necessarily know having not been practitioners, but you being a practitioner, that like some cultures resist that. And so we want to honor their culture too. Okay. Well, we are coming up on our last question. Can you believe it? This has been so much fun that I lost track of time.
I know. I'm sorry. I think we went way over.
Oh, no. We're absolutely fine. This is, I appreciate it. This is getting great knowledge out to the people. So, hey. In closing, please tell us what advice you would give to a new teacher instructing English language learners.
I would say collect your data. Find out who they are. Keep notes about that. And then I would say make sure you laugh and show the fact that you also are vulnerable and you also don't know everything, because it's huge. I ask a student to tell me one word in Vietnamese and I spend 2 weeks trying to pronounce it correctly, and they laugh at me quite a bit and I laugh at myself. And I think it makes for a good relationship as far as language is hard. And English is, in my classroom, well, sometimes we say English is illogical. And so together we can laugh at that. I think that's huge. And then if anybody is new now, all the patience for yourself. These 2 years that we just came out of have been so hard. You're not going to see the language growth that we really would love to see. But it's okay, because these were hard years. And as long as they're having that social connection with school and they believe that teachers do believe in them, I think that's huge. I think that's what it all comes down to.
One specific question, because I'm just thinking about when I was a new teacher, right? First year teacher, you want to know specifically how. So when you say collect data, is there a teacher notebook or something they should have that they're writing this down, or what has worked for you?
So I'm a big tech person because I travel to lots of different classrooms. So everything I have is digital. I actually use an iPad, and I actually create notebooks in an app called Notability. And I have a different page for different students that joined me this year. And I ask them just like very specific things. Like I will call the parents and do a parent interview and say, tell me a little bit about Sean's elementary school. Did he take any advanced classes? Did he play any sports? Did he kind of like anything I can gather? And I sort of just set it aside. But then as we're going through the year, if I notice that, Sean is struggling with working in groups when there's a girl, I might just ask Sean. I might, do a little research into his culture. Is that a cultural norm that I have not been attending to? And I'll just make that a note. So like in his, file, I'll just say like prefers to work with boys, or prefers to work with girls. Like sometimes it's fine. Or prefers to write down things before they share them out loud. And just as I notice, in high school, I have the students for all 4 years. So the more data I can collect freshman year, the more I just know them the rest of the time. But also asking about their interests. So I have a lot of students, which is probably common, that know soccer and play soccer. So in class, I might use soccer examples instead of using football or basketball examples, right? My native English speakers can, get on board with my soccer examples. And my students from Venezuela or Brazil who have been playing soccer don't need me to give them that background knowledge to set them up for the task, which is, it's nice. It's like one extra thing one less thing that I have to do as the teacher. And I think it also shows that I understand a little bit about them, right? Going back to that relationship piece. So very specifically, I do that digitally.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to write that. Notability.
I know. And I know school districts don't buy like apps and iPads and things like that, but I can't tell you. I used to do it in a Google Doc, and each student had its own folder. And that was fine. I just didn't necessarily.
That was my next question. Was that fun?
It was fine. I just had to remember to like go back and put it in my iPad. You can see my notes for today. Like I just write. I don't know if you can see it, but I just write right on there. Right.
Nice. Last, you just made me think about you being mobile. So this is I promise this is the last question. So do you have a caseload?
I do. Yep. About 60 students.
So, so that's my question. And do you feel like that's a reasonable
I should say, I'm so sorry. There's 2 of us and we have about 60 students. So I have about 30-ish mine and then 30-ish hers.
Okay. I was going to ask you, I was like, wow, I was totally off that. I think that was kind of high, 60. Okay. So about 30 students on a caseload, that's realistic and manageable.
Yeah. And students are on our, if you want to call it like caseload, they're on there from NEP all the way to like an exited year 2 student. So the exited students are sort of, we keep tabs on them and just check in for 2 years afterward, but that's a lower time commitment. You know, they usually already know us. And so they will see us in the hallway. We can do a quick check-in that's informal. We have a homeroom period and we can check in with students then. My active students that are the ones that are seen by me or by my counterpart every day in maybe more than one class is probably about 20 students total, 22. But in that case, they're not really divided hers and mine. They are for paperwork because otherwise the paperwork gets a little bit dicey and out of control. But as far as like co-teaching, I might see all 20 students in science or math or another class, and she might see some of those same students in social studies or English or another class.
Wow, that was super helpful. Thank you. Very technical and specific. I appreciate it. So that concludes our interview. This has been FECG TV, which is the Fisher Educational Group television channel, YouTube channel. And our special guest today was Mrs. Kara Schultz, who is an English language development specialist teacher with tell me your school district again, if you don't mind.
I'm in Douglas County School District in Colorado.
Perfect. Thank you. And you have been a great guest. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you. Yep. I look forward to talking to you in the future again.
I do as well. Thanks so much, Sean.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.